Welcome to the PPIAC podcast, highlighting the professional private investigators of Colorado and beyond. My name is Tara Cocone. I'm the VP of Training for the PPIAC, and I want to thank you for listening to our show. If you enjoy what you hear, please pass it along to somebody else. This podcast is an accompaniment to our in-person monthly meetings, conferences, and development courses. Since 1978, the PPIAC has been the industry leader with a diverse membership of highly vetted professionals engaged in networking and continuous training. Learn more at www.ppiac.org or email me at training@ppiac.org.
We've got a really interesting topic that I think will strike a chord with everybody.
So that's my job, to listen for the real.
The PPIAC Legislative Update, January 2023, brought to you by Rob Garza.
Good afternoon. This is Rob Garza, Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Professional Private Investigators Association of Colorado. I'm here to chat with you a little bit about the 2023 legislative session, which begins January 9th and runs through May 8th. With the outcome of recent midterm elections, the red wave that was anticipated never materialized. Our state is a solid blue state in the House and the Senate, with many new Democrats coming into the legislature. We've made efforts to connect and establish a rapport with assorted legislators at the Capitol in order to have representation for the association should issues or laws arise that may affect directly or indirectly what we do as a service industry and how we provide those services to our clients, and at the same time protecting the interests of Colorado residents. These legislative connection efforts will include, but not be limited to, the turning of and necessary response to the introduced bills which may directly or indirectly affect our service industry. I'm confident with the valuable insights of our lobbyist, Jennifer Castle, and help of our veteran members, we should be able to stay ahead of the legislative tide. I welcome any ideas, any insight that you might have or be able to contribute to this effort. Thank you for your consideration.
Hello, I am Nicole Cusinelli, the publisher of PI Magazine. We've been in publication for 35 years, and we are the most respected voice of the professional investigator nationwide and worldwide. Today, I'd like to touch base on the importance of joining and belonging to your state professional investigator association. I cannot impress enough the importance of becoming a member of your state professional investigator association. Joining your state association provides additional vetting and also adds credibility to your agency and you as a private investigator. The state associations also allow for networking opportunities with other investigators, which would otherwise not be possible or easily attainable. Most state associations provide continuing education through trainings held during the year or through their annual conference. These keep the PI informed on current matters, laws, or anything that directly applies to private investigations within their respective state. I know as the former executive administrator for the New Jersey Licensed Private Investigators Association, that many times someone looking to hire a private investigator would contact the state association directly. So the phone call would come in, and being in that position, that phone call would come to me. And usually the person calling they're already very emotional. There's usually urgency involved in the phone call and they're looking to hire a professional or a private investigator. We say professional because it's a profession. To them, it was just the most logical place to start to look for a PI. In New Jersey, there is vetting through the state police, there's background checks, so there's a process, and PIs in New Jersey are licensed. But even with that said, individuals still are driven, and to them, it's the most logical place to start with the association to locate and find a PI for whatever they may need the PI for. So additionally, PI associations, they have their own vetting process, and they're also going to vouch for the investigator. Private investigators also tend to contact the state associations first when they're looking to employ the services of a PI, whether it's in their state or another state. Another reason why I always like to speak about associations is because being a member of a state association is, in my opinion, crucial for those states that have no licensing requirements for private investigators. Unfortunately, Colorado recently fell into this category in August of 2021. Per the sunset legislation, licensure for private investigators ended. What this meant for Colorado is that there's no regulatory agency for licensing private investigators, and you don't need to have a license to practice PI work. In a state where there's no licensing requirements, you could wake up one day, anyone could wake up one day and decide that they are now a private investigator and go out and do work as a PI. And they have no experience, they have no background in investigations, and they have no training. Would you let a doctor treat you who did not have a medical school degree or a medical license? Would you employ the services of an attorney that did not have a degree in law and was not a licensed attorney? Of course not. You wouldn't even think twice about it. And we have to apply the same thinking to professional investigators. This is how we have to think about it pertaining to individuals that are doing investigations, performing investigations of civil and criminal matters that affect people's lives. Additionally, without licensing being in place, there are opportunities for unsavory individuals to take advantage of someone who could potentially be scammed out of thousands of dollars. So having the associations and being a part of the association not only protects the public, it protects the investigator, and it gives the investigator more credibility that they can now put their services out there saying, I belong to the association, and giving that potential client more confidence in knowing that they're not dealing with someone who just woke up today, deciding they want to be a PI, and is going to potentially scam them out of thousands of dollars. On the PI Magazine podcast, episode 47, we had the opportunity to have a guest on the show, Richard Brooks. He's the owner of Richard Brooks Investigations in Jackson, Mississippi. Mississippi is one of the states that has no licensing requirements for private investigators. Richard explains how an individual with zero experience in investigations can be a PI, how a convicted criminal can be released from jail today and decide to become a PI tomorrow. And to me, and I'm sure to many others, is just frightening. Richard is a past and is the current president of the Mississippi Private Investigators Association, MPIA. So for Mississippi, it's almost necessary. And the backing of the association ensures not only the protection for the public, but for the private investigator as well. Joining your association, being a member, retaining your membership, and staying as a member of your state association. I am Nicole Cusinelli, the publisher of PI Magazine.
My name is Pete Smith. I'm with Perin Discovery. We do a number of things. One of them is cyber investigations. And so we've got a nice presentation centering around how many people can tell us that they have been hacked or they know someone who's been hacked. Probably all of us. If it seems prevalent, because it is becoming more and more prevalent, there's a couple sides to this. On one side of the fence, there are the legitimate threats where there are people, professional hackers, perhaps, that, they're trying to get to information, to get to sources of funds. And those are areas where, that is happening. On the other side, though, you guys could probably relate to this. There's the ex-girlfriend, the ex-husband, the scorned business partner, the obnoxious neighbor who we think has hacked into our router, who is reading our emails and text messages, who seems to know just the unknowable information. Well, the presentation that we're going to share with you guys tonight is going to expose you to helping you understand the difference between some of these real threats and then some of those that are paranoid induced. And so I think you guys are a great audience for this because you guys are front and center in likely getting these calls. In fact, we know you are because we are getting them from you guys. And so armed with a background in computer, digital forensics, and cybersecurity, we're going to present to you guys an overview of some of the challenges, some of the solutions that you guys can use in support of your own customers. So with that said, before we get into the gut of the presentation, just to share with you who we are and how we even got here, the core of our business, we do a few things: digital forensics, electronic discovery, and cyber investigations. We're the company that law firms, attorneys, legal teams will call us to say, hey, we represent a corporate entity and there are emails to collect. There's data from laptops, there's social media. They call us to do that collection. We do that in a forensic manner. We are able to collect a bunch of information, and to help the legal team, we'll distill all that information to just perhaps the relevant, important stuff, and we'll put that in a database for the legal teams to review. An offshoot of that is what we have learned through cybersecurity, and I think cybersecurity is still this evolving service line. For us, there are aspects of cybersecurity, cyber investigations, email breaches, network ransomware, that resemble some of the same things that we do on the private side with our law firms as it relates to digital collections, e-discovery. And so we launched this service line, cyber investigations, to appeal to those instances, just as business idea to say, there's the cyber threat is not going away, especially at the corporate side. So we came up with this service line. We do a lot of work with private law firms, insurance companies, corporate entities. We also have a segment of our business where we do a lot of work with the federal government. For Native American-owned business, 8A certified. We also are a subcontractor to the largest litigation support contract in the country with the Department of Justice. We're just a dot in the billion-dollar contract. So we're here today because we launched this service line last year, the cyber investigation service line. We made a huge effort to market and outreach to attorneys involved in data privacy and cyber investigations, to insurance companies who support those teams, to corporate entities who might present opportunities for us. And you know what happened? We kept getting calls from Uncle John, who said his neighbor was watching him through his surveillance camera, from Aunt Betty, who said her ex-husband was reading her email. And so this idea of capturing all this business from corporate entities, from law firms, from insurance companies, led us down this path where we're talking to everyday consumer. And I think you guys, if you're on the receiving end of these calls, probably like us, after a while you said, oh, man. And after a while, we said, you know what? There might be an opportunity to help some people turn it into a service line. And that's what we've done. So my colleague, Dustin Mooney, is going to speak to the heart of what we've come up with, an overview for you guys, because I think it will really strike a chord with you guys because you are on the receiving end of some of these calls. And I think it will help educate you on fact versus fiction. Aaron Perzak, between the two of them, those guys are the smart guys. I'm just the funny guy. But both of them can speak to the cyber piece, the forensics piece, and that's how we got here. Without further ado, I'll bring up Dustin.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not a loud talker, so if you need me to go up, just give me one of these, and I'll do my best, just so you know. My name is Dustin. I've been in cybersecurity for about 15 years now, doing digital investigations for about 10. Focus, like Pete said, on ransomware investigations, business email compromise, any sort of breaches or hacking that have occurred. Also kind of day-to-day forensics, I would call it. Aaron plays a lot more in this space. Employee exit reviews if somebody's leaving a company, analyzing their machines, seeing what they've been doing, as well as general digital forensic requests like who sent the document, did they open this email, things like that. So there's a set of digital evidence that gets left behind when somebody interacts with the computer. I just want to go over this outline here, let you guys know what I'm going to be talking about. So as Pete said, we're calling this consumer grade cybersecurity challenges. So things that everyday people are experiencing that we've identified that there's a market here that you guys are actually interacting with a lot. And there's some overlap where we all can work together. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a concept called attack surface. We have a lot of confusions from potential customers about where these attacks are coming from and how they're being targeted. So I want to get that cleared up so everybody in the room understands that. We're going to talk about the types of attacks that I've seen, as well as the struggles that people go through when these attacks are happening. And then again, talking about the relationship between your investigations and how this overlap occurs in the cyber field. And then finally, talking about what can we do, as well as what we can't do, because there are some very important things to know that we're not going to do. I'm calling it case studies, but just a couple kind of examples to see if some things resonate, some juices start flowing as I talk about what we've actually done and how we've helped people. I'm probably going to keep this presentation pretty quick because I actually want to talk more with you guys. I want you guys to bring up your cases, talk about, hey, I had somebody with a cell phone. So feel free to bring up those topics at the end here. All right. So I just want to start by talking about what are some of the challenges that consumers are facing here. And these kind of flow down and actually all the way back up. So starting here is really there's a limited set of resources for consumers. They don't have the knowledge and they don't really know where to turn for help when these things are happening. So they're turning to private investigators, right? You guys are getting these phone calls saying, hey, I need help. I'm being hacked. Somebody's reading my email. The other thing that they're doing is they're looking at Google. And so they're Googling, hey, somebody's doing this. And, as we all know, if you search enough Google, you'll find the answer you're looking for, whether it's right or wrong. And so they're finding these things and they're being misled by their internet searches. And so there's a lot of problems that are happening here. There's a big misunderstanding of what is actually happening when somebody hacks you. I have a certification in penetration testing. I know how these things happen. And I'll tell you what, it's not CSI Miami and it's not the movies. It just doesn't happen that way. But a lot of people see that stuff and they think, oh, this is how people are hacking me. So there's a misunderstanding of what's actually happening. They're really becoming commonplace. Cyber attacks, everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's got an email account, several computers. Digital devices are ubiquitous now. Everybody has them. And so as everybody acquires more devices, there's more opportunities for more attacks. Something that I see a lot is that when these events are occurring, the potential customers will be creating narratives that they've created about what they think is happening, and they will go down the rabbit hole to prove that that's actually what's going on. And sometimes what happens is it actually distracts from the real problems that are actually happening that they need to be concerned about because they're focusing on some theory that they have that they're trying to confirm. So this is a challenge that I see happening a lot. And then finally, again, number 1 and number 5 are very much married, but without the resources and knowledge, it leads to really this poor cyber hygiene and missing best cybersecurity best practices. So again, I'm a forensic investigator, but I have a background in cybersecurity. I talk a lot about a concept named risk. So risk is the multiplication of the likelihood of something happening to you by the impact that would have on you. So when we get to number 5 and we start helping people with their risks, we find ways to reduce the likelihood of an attack happening, as well as reduce the impact that may have on them. If you have a digital device, there is always risk. If you have an email account, there is risk associated with that. So you can't eliminate risk, you can only reduce it to an acceptable level. So that's kind of one of the challenges that we have to get on top of, because sometimes people think we can make all this stop and go away, and that's really not the case. So let's go ahead and talk about attack surface. So when we talk about attack surface, we talk about where do these attacks go towards? What are they going after? So on the left side here, we can talk about the physical things that are being attacked. So physical is something you can hold in your hand or something you could touch. Think about your phone, think about your computer, think about your router. Those devices have their own set of challenges, right? On the other side, we have cloud-based attacks. These are things that live on the internet. If you have a phone and it's hacked and you turn it off, the hacker's out. But your Facebook account doesn't ever get turned off. There's always power to that, right? These accounts live in the internet, usually companies on some server that they're hosting. And so these cloud accounts are another set of potential opportunities to get compromised. Now we have this middle part, right, in the Venn diagram, where on your physical device, you probably have a Facebook app. And if your Facebook is compromised, a lot of times people will say, oh, well, my phone is hacked. Well, actually, no, it's not. Your account is hacked that's attached to your phone. The reason why I'm bringing this up is it's really important for you guys out there as you're hearing these people talk about these conversations that they're having with you about the challenges they're having, to let them really understand, actually, hey, that's not your problem. This is your problem. And again, it goes back to one of the first slides of people creating this narrative where they think they've figured out what's going on and they've convinced themselves. And so our job is to actually explain to them, the attack is actually happening here. So this is where we need to focus. What's a really common thing that happens, a struggle that kind of somebody might go through and experience as they do this? As Pete said, people will say, hey, I don't know how, but somebody knows what I'm talking about. Somebody has information that I only shared with this person when I was on a particular phone call. And so this can often be something that really kicks something off where somebody starts worrying like, oh, I'm compromised. Somebody's listening to me. And then what happens there is they start looking around. Oh, let me get on Google. Let me figure out, can somebody hack me? Can they get on my phone? What can they do? And then they start confirming this bias that something's going on with them. Now, they might not be completely wrong, but often they take it a little bit too far. That leads to number 3. Now they don't feel safe. I can't use my work email. I can't talk on the phone. I got to go get a burner. My SIM's been swapped. I can't log into any website. And so what happens is they start feeling unsafe just being on the internet in general. This can really disrupt their life. I'll give you an example. Number 3 is actually becoming a big one. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a second, but I have a client right now, and the client told me that his Instagram account got hacked and logged out, and he was freaking out, and he couldn't believe it, and he was so worried. And I was just thinking like, wow, like over like an Instagram account, this guy is like losing his mind. So these things are really important to these people, so they start worrying a lot. After they feel unsafe, they may get locked out, or they may have a compromised account. So these things start to blend together, and this is the sequence that usually goes through this struggle. So what are some things that we're seeing out in the wild? What are some things that we're dealing with? Some of these we can help with, and some of them we can't, but these are still happening, so I wanted to call them out. Most typically, scams, extortion, and sextortion. There are scam call centers in different foreign countries where they're literally working as a business to scam people. And so they're targeting typically like older people that are a little bit less apt to knowing technology, convincing them to download things. And so these call centers out there are they're everywhere at this point. So there's a lot of scams going on. Remote access. This is a big one that's becoming a pretty hot topic. Cell phone remote access is becoming much easier. There's a lot of software out there right now that people can go sign up for, and they have legitimate reasons. Like if you're a parent and you want to keep an eye on your children, you may install an app to see what they're saying, see what their websites they're going to. But in reality, people are using this in nefarious acts, and they're using it to get people to download an app where they can monitor their cell phone, see what kind of communications are happening. Usually what they're shooting for is financial theft. Hackers are motivated by money. Sometimes when you have a personal kind of situation or some sort of fight that's happening, that could be one motivation. But if we are talking about people in foreign countries, usually they're going after money. We do have account compromise. This person that I'm working with is an influencer. They have 250,000 followers on Instagram. The hackers know that if they get that account, they now have an audience of 250,000 people that they can try to get those people to click on something bad. We see these accounts get compromised because they can spread their attack. Identity theft, not a lot we can do about identity theft, but it may be an opportunity for you guys. If you are getting people calling you, you can resell some of these services and you can collect a reoccurring revenue. So those are opportunities for you guys. Again, harassment, impersonation. I can't really make somebody stop harassing somebody, but I can give them some information about what's going on that may be able to give them a little bit of peace of mind. So what can we do? Like, how can we actually help in these situations? Well, the first one is malware infections. If we have a computer or a phone that we believe has been infected by a virus or some sort of malware, we can identify that, do a forensic assessment of it. We'll make a forensic image, analyze it in our software, try to find some malicious indicators, and then let them know like, hey, you've got something bad on your phone. Remote access, similar thing. We can take a look at the applications that are installed. We know what some of these remote access tools are. We can compare them to the known tools and make a determination if there is remote access happening. Another thing here is permissions to microphones, permissions to camera, and any other permissions to like your calendar. You guys know when you install an app, do you want to let it do this? So if you have an app that has permissions to your mic that's focused on remote access, that may be something that we want to go and check and let them know like, hey, we found this on your device. So that's something that we can look at. Digital profiling, this can go both ways. We can build a profile on a suspect, or we can build a profile on a client. They may want to know, like, what can you find out about me? How far is my internet exposure? And so this is good information, particularly for like high net worth individuals or somebody that does have a concern about what they look like on the internet. So we can build this profile and go, here's everything I was able to find. Cyber hygiene. One thing that we do is conversations. I will sit down with somebody and talk to them for 2 hours and say, tell me all of your cyber problems. And then what I'll do is I'll listen to the things that they're doing wrong and I'll take notes and say, okay, here's what you need to do to fix this. So this is a service that we're doing as well. Account takeover. This is probably probably blends a little bit into the cyber hygiene. If they are experiencing an account that's been compromised, a lot of services these days will show you, hey, you had a login from this IP address at this time, and do you recognize this or not? Now, the cool thing about this is if we are able to find something that's malicious or something that's not authorized, you can then take that to your attorney, issue a subpoena to the internet service provider and say, hey, I need to know who owned this IP address at this time. I need the name. And that's how we find out who did it. Really, what we're selling here is peace of mind. What am I dealing with? Am I hacked? Am I not hacked? Some people want to know that they're not hacked. And hey, we looked, we didn't find anything. That's a good thing. Or hey, we looked and yeah, we do see something. This is how you go fix it. So really, the peace of mind is like, in my experience, is what people are looking for in these investigations. What can we not do? We've learned a lot over the years of what we don't want to do, and some of that came the hard way, but here they are. So first thing is make it stop. We have no authority to stop somebody from hacking somebody. We have no authority to just go to that person. It's just not in our realm. That's a law enforcement thing. We're providing information and we're providing peace of mind. So that's a big one. Sometimes people say, hey, I want this to stop. And we say, well, we can't do that. But as the last presenter said, finding that smoking gun is usually not what happens, especially in digital forensics as well. What we do is we build a list of circumstantial evidence and draw conclusions based off of that. When it all starts pointing to one thing, we can go, okay, based off of this, this, and this, I can draw this conclusion. Very rarely do we find a name, a phone number, an email address. When somebody hacks you, it doesn't leave that information behind. It's just not exactly how it works. Sometimes clients want that, so we have to set that expectation. Say, actually, we can't find that for you. Which takes me to my next one, the smoking gun. The last two here, hackbacks. We're not going to go hack somebody's email because they're upset with them and they think maybe if we do that, we'll figure out who's doing this. That's illegal. We don't do those things. And we also don't do any cleanup or remediation. If they do have malware or virus on their computer, we're not going to go remove it for them. The best case scenario there is to wipe everything, start fresh, go buy a new phone, and learn lessons how to not let that happen again. So I just want to talk about some things that we've actually done and ways that we've been able to help people. And I want to talk about this more. So if anybody wants to just, hey, I got one of these, I had somebody where this happened or they asked me if I could do this. So first one here, I was working with a high net worth individual in Washington, D.C., a little bit of an older gentleman, was recently divorced, and he wanted to start dating again. So he was meeting women and going out on dates. But every time he went on a date, they just disappeared. They didn't want to talk to him anymore. And he didn't know what was going on. So somebody was reaching out to these people and telling them how terrible and awful he was. He kind of figured this out later. And so he hired a private investigator. They were looking around and they literally had nothing. They had some theory about somebody being in Starbucks at a certain time that maybe was there listening in on his conversation. It really didn't go anywhere, but I got my hands on the phone, started looking at it, and I found an artifact that showed that there was an authentication from an email address that was for a female, had a female's name in it. Gave it to him and he said, yeah, that's my personal assistant actually. And so after years, like maybe 2 years of this, they finally came to us. I found this, I showed it to them, and it actually was the personal assistant that was basically sabotaging his personal life because she had some feelings for him and she didn't want him to be out dating and things like that. So, we were able to draw that conclusion based off the digital evidence. The next one, I've been kind of referencing it. I'm working with a DJ, some sort of social media influencer at the moment, has some business partners working to set up parties and raves and things like that. Things went sour and now this person's being targeted. And what we're doing is we're reviewing his accounts and going, do you have any unauthorized access? How are you managing your passwords? Are you using a VPN? Are you using antivirus software? And so just having conversations about what's happening in his day-to-day usage with his devices to help him shore those things up and get on top of them so that we can, again, reduce the risk. So he's feeling a little bit better about where he's at. And then the last one here, I was working a divorce case. There was a situation where the woman felt that her husband, who was very apt with technology, was maybe listening or spying in on her. So we collected an image of her computer, took a look at it, and we were able to find a application that enhanced the microphone capabilities to listen for more in the background. And so what I was able to see is that this application was run by this user account at this time, and also provide her with a summary like, hey, this is for listening to you. And so they went to the court case and she kind of said, hey, I hired a digital forensic investigator. I know that you've been listening to me. And the husband kind of backed off a little bit once he found this out because he knew that he had been caught a little bit. So these are the types of cases that we're working. And there's a pretty strong demand here. And we are getting some of the phone calls, but I have a sense that maybe you guys are getting more. Working with us is really good for your business because you're going to enhance your capability profile. You're going to have more services under your umbrella and say, hey, I know somebody that can do that for you, as well as referral fees. If you guys send somebody to us, you're going to get something out of it, and you might not even have to do anything. You may get an hourly rate based off of what we do for them. And just talking about what are the good clients, again, like high net worth individuals, people you really got to listen to the story. What are these people talking about? We've dealt with people that make no sense, and we don't want to work with them. Another big one that Aaron called out was if anybody's talking about the FBI listening to them or the government or the CIA, we want nothing to do with that. If that's the truth, we don't want to interfere with whatever they're being listened for. So there are definitely some people we don't want to work with, but occasionally, we really get somebody that is having a real problem and we find things and we are able to help them. So that's the kind of service where we're able to help, and some of the things we're also not able to help with. So does anybody have any stories or anything you want to call out? Any experiences with anything like this?
Maybe online from Lee asking ex-spouse is using her Apple ID to sign into all kinds of services. Apple shows the sign-in from Albuquerque, New Mexico, where ex-spouse lives. She wants proof that it's him doing it. Is this possible?
So this is where if we get that IP address, then it's up to the attorney. An IP address is okay, it's good, but it's not the smoking gun the way the movies make it look. You can get a general location, you can figure out who the internet service provider is. From there, the attorney takes it, subpoenas the internet service provider, and IP addresses rotate. Yours, you probably have it for 2 or 3 weeks, and then your ISP goes, okay, now you got a new one. That IP may be assigned to somebody different at that point. And so what we want to do is subpoena from the attorney to the ISP and say, on this date, at this time, who was this IP address assigned to? And they do keep logs and records of that. So you can get to the bottom of it, but that's not something we can really do. You really got to get the attorney involved. There's a lot of circumstantial things that could happen. In most cases, people aren't on their VPN if they're at home. So we can kind of try to pinpoint those. They could be though, right? They could make it look like they're coming from anywhere in the world. So it really just depends is kind of the situation. But if it does look like it's from an ISP in a location that we believe this person is, that's a pretty good indicator that it's them. We just need that final subpoena to get that issued.
Can you clarify when somebody says my phone or computer has been hacked? Mm-hmm. Can you clarify what they think they're talking about and what an actual hack is?
Most of the time it's remote access. There is some sort of information that somebody else seems to know about them. Like, hey, I sent this email that had this specific conversation topic and somehow so-and-so knew about it the next day. Or I've heard this one. I was talking on the phone with my lawyer and we were planning this angle in our case. And as soon as we issued it, the opposition already had a response within an hour. It's just not possible without them knowing that we were talking about this for the last couple weeks or months or whatever it may be. So those are the kinds of things that we hear. They think, well, my phone is hacked. Well, was somebody standing behind you, right? There's a lot of different kind of scenarios that can be explained, but it's always, no, I'm hacked. Our job is to get to the bottom of that and go, what is the truth here? Like, what is happening? So attack surface, was it the phone or was it the password, right? And so that's that kind of thing that we help people understand a little bit better is like, actually, that's not it. It's this over here. So we get them going in the right direction. There was a scenario where maybe her Facebook had an issue and somebody came to her and said, hey, I got this message from you. Like, did you send this to me? And I don't know what that is. So like, I think I can answer you why hackers are doing that. I think that's what you're looking for. So a lot of times people will get their account hacks again to go out. So how many friends do you have? Okay, so that's 450 people that the hacker was able to send a message to get them to click on a malicious link to maybe find somebody that they actually want to target. So maybe there's somebody that's in banking and finance that you have a friend of, and they put that, hey, I work at this bank. Oh, great, that's a good target. So they'll start sending messages to that person to try to target them. So maybe you're not the target, but they will go looking for other targets. And the interesting thing about hacks, it's really like an ecosystem. And we see this in business email compromise as well. If a business email is compromised, usually their peers are too. Their contractors, their partners, their customers. There's this web that happens because the hackers kind of go out. And they don't want to, if they have access to somebody's account, they want more. And so that's why they're doing that. They're trying to get people to click on things to maybe get access to their Gmail, other Facebooks, maybe bank accounts or Venmo, or they're trying to extort somebody. That's something else I've seen on Facebook happen a lot. So they're trying to extend their reach. That's why they're doing that. There's not much you can do about impersonation other than report it to Facebook. From our standpoint, like honestly, there's no money to be made there. Yeah. So Aaron said they are kind of always listening, but, and think about risk, right? So we think about that term likelihood and impact. What is the likelihood that somebody's going to hack your Amazon Alexa? I don't even know how to do that. And I live in this world, right? This is my job. And I wouldn't even really know where to start. I think if I really wanted to dedicate myself to figuring that out, I'm sure people have. And so it's all about the likelihoods, and the other thing that I run across a lot of, and this is probably worth mentioning, is that somebody seems to always know a hacker. Oh, they're really good at computers, and no, they work in this cyber company. And I hear this a lot, and I just don't know a lot of people with these skills. So it just seems very odd that all these people I talk to seem to know somebody that's able to hack them. So again, that's that kind of paranoia. We got to say, who are we working with here? Is this a good customer? Is it somebody that's a little paranoid? We have to make that conclusion. It could be said about any of these social media companies. They're collecting data about you, and this is the world that we live in. Again, what's the risk of using TikTok? Are you a high net worth social media influencer or some sort of government official that maybe you do need to be concerned about? Are you a mother of 3 that stays at home and takes care of the kids? Maybe it's not a big deal if your data is being used. And most of the time, in my experience, it's mostly for marketing. They want to sell you things. Not so much nefarious, but there are hacks that happen, right? And so maybe somebody gets a hold of that data and they are able to go, oh, okay, this person likes to look at these websites or buys these products. If we're being targeted and there is some sort of investigation that needs to happen, that may be something that somebody could go after. But again, think about the risk. What is the likelihood that somebody's able to go hack TikTok because they're upset with their neighbor who cut their lawn too far into their side? Whatever the situation is that made somebody upset, it's probably just not really going to be an issue for the average everyday consumer.
I'd highlight, this was actually a referral that John sent us a few months ago. And I mention it only because Dustin had talked about the conversation that he has with these people. And he could probably speak to it better than I can, but I sat on the call. I fielded the first call, kind of filtered and made sure that I have Dustin get involved. So I sat on this call while Dustin, for 2 hours, peeled back the onion to get to this. And it was fascinating to hear Dustin have to navigate this, because what started off as, and I think, John, you'd provided some professional services, what started off as, hey, I think my neighbor has hacked our router. All right. So I think Dustin kind of put that to the side and then peeled that back and was able to get them to understand that that couldn't happen. Well, I think they are manipulating my security camera footage. So that was okay, we got to peel this one back. And it just kept going to all these places, to how it ended up. He had fallen prey to one of those phone calls where his Microsoft operating system had something happened. He needed to give someone from overseas access so he could do something. And so I highlight this to you guys because I think Dustin has become part psychologist, talking to people on a couch, but technologist to help people understand, hey, what is real, what is not? Because what started off as a husband and wife team, really anxious and a little emotional and convinced that it was their neighbor who's part of Black Lives Matter is doing all these things to my router, and I guess I shouldn't have taken that call. To hear Dustin go through this call, I think has been an evolution, because I think 2-3 years ago, Aaron and I would have fielded these calls. We didn't have the cyber chops. We could do forensics and maybe identify, hey, this is on there, but we don't know what it is. But that was it. And Dustin, with his cyber chops, is what was intended to be a corporate service focus, has evolved into this. And there's a lot of consumers out there who are dealing with everyday problems. He's learned how to talk to people, peel away the emotional, paranoid stuff to, this is the technology, let's isolate it here and focus on this. Because for 2 hours, I sat on this, and at one point, I had to turn off my Zoom camera and go, I can't believe he's doing this. And so I wanted to mention that might be normal.
And I'll speak to that just really quick. That's the process. I know when somebody's telling me something, it's always about risk. I don't think that that's very likely. It's possible, but I don't think it's likely. What else? And so I just get them to keep talking. What else? What else? And then I hear something and go, that's what you need to focus on. And then we start talking about it more. I said, you got a call from Microsoft. That's interesting. I said, did it sound like it was a person from America or maybe somebody from overseas? Yeah, overseas. Okay. So did they make you download something? Yeah. And did they get on your computer and your mouse move? Yeah, that happened. Okay. Well, I know this scam, right? So this is something I'm familiar with. So I knew exactly where it was going once I kind of heard that. So that's my job, to listen for the real and to get rid of the stuff that just is kind of silly, honestly.
I had a question, more of a business question.
How do you navigate, 2 hours on a phone? Is this paid time?
Yeah,
Unpaid
paid time.
It's paid time.
I can throw out some numbers. I don't know if you want to like just.
But how do
those
you
or-
navigate that up front where
Yeah.
you feel like, is this going to be a phone call that sets up the real presentation, or is this a phone call that you get sucked into and
Well,
before you realize in 45 minutes of your time
Yeah,
is gone through?
I mean, I'm a forensic investigator, but I'm a businessman too. So if I see opportunities, say, hey, well, let's analyze your cell phone, right? So now I have a 2-hour conversation and I get a cell phone analysis. So I get collection, analysis, reporting, right? And so there's hours that get billed after that. I'm listening for those things too. It might not be necessary. Like in this case, we kind of got to the bottom of it and said, well, you need to wipe your computer. You need to not do this again. And they also get a set of cybersecurity recommendations. You called out password manager, right? That's something I tell everybody. Go download this software. Stop writing down your password. Stop using the same one over and over again. And so I come with this kind of solution at the end of like, here's how you make sure that we reduce the risks so that this probably doesn't happen again. Again, there's no one fix to solve all the problems and it'll never go away. Here's what you can do to protect yourself. And people, honestly, they just end up feeling a lot better. That word peace of mind, like I can tell people just, after they talk to me because they have their questions answered and the worry goes away. They find out what actually happened. So in this case, they could stop worrying about the neighbor because it wasn't them.
Yeah. I'd add, John brought it up. There have been a couple conversations I've been on where I'm like, okay, the reasonableness is just that there's red flags all around. I will say we can provide some intervention, but it will cost this. And it is meant to be a deterrent. And if they bite, okay, then we'll have to go down this rabbit hole. The idea is that I've experienced so far, and, Dustin maybe more than me, is that are trying to help people. People may have some legitimate issues, but we've got to separate the emotional, irrational stuff and see if they'll work with us. And when they can, then it's like, okay, we have a legitimate threat here that we're dealing with. It speaks to my uncle had my password and he no longer talks to us, my girlfriend from high school. When it starts getting into that, that's when we've got to find a way to put on some brakes. And, financially, that's sometimes a good way to do that.
So forgive me, I may be using the wrong term, friendly hacker, if you're familiar with that. I mean, occasionally
White hat. Yeah, white hat hacker.
What is it?
White hat.
White hat
Yeah.
hacker? Okay,
Yeah, white hat. That'd be a friendly
I
hacker.
know I was slaughtering it. I assumed it was
Yeah.
benign, but
Yeah.
I'll occasionally get a call for that. Is that, first of all, somebody might say, we want to test our organization from the outside to see if our cybersecurity is working?
Yeah.
Is that something you all do?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely in my realm. If it's an individual saying, "Hey, I want to hack this account because I don't like this person," or maybe I think they're doing. I had a lady ask me to hack her son's account because he wasn't talking to her, and I said, "Well, I'm not doing that for you." But for businesses that want to enter into a legal agreement where they understand we're doing this, I'll give you an example. I just
Right,
did some.
that's what I'm referring to.
I just did something called pretext phone calling. So I called 50 people for a company and tried to get their passwords. I made up a story about who I was and, I'm with your IT company, and I got a couple of them. And so we do services like that as well. So if you guys run into those things, those are options and possibilities too. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I'll just say thanks for listening. And if you guys have questions, reach out to Pete first. Him and I are in contact. So he'll probably say, hey, we got somebody to talk to. And I think if you're unsure, it's good to reach out and let us kind of figure out this is one we want to pursue. Or, we kind of are getting very well fine-tuned with the good stuff and the stuff that we definitely want to stay away from. So, if you're not sure, just reach out and we can help you out with that. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Check, check, check. Volume check. 1, 2, 3. Welcome to the interrogation.
My name is Pete Smith. I'm with Perin Discovery, and I serve as the president and jack of all trades for the business.
My name is Dustin Mooney, and I am a technical advisor for Perin Discovery. I have a background in cybersecurity as well as digital forensics, primarily focusing on ransomware and breach compromises, including business email compromise, and moving more into the space of consumer-grade forensics and cybersecurity help.
So the name, Is this Perin like I'm pairing my Bluetooth to the phone, or is there some other significance to the name?
We're in our 5th year business, and it was almost a couple weeks to the anniversary. And I think my business partner, Aaron Perzak, we were over breakfast and struggling with, hey, we have this, what we think is this great idea to run a business and how we do things differently, but what do we name it, right? What is something unique and memorable and all this? And we we each came in with a list of names, and we looked at each other and said, there's got to be something. Well, if you take the P in Pete and Aaron, yeah. And so my kids laugh because I say I'm the P in Perin.
Okay.
That's over $30 breakfast. That's all it took.
That makes just as much sense as like I'm pairing my Bluetooth to the computer type thing, but it just coincidentally
we weren't
works,
that
right?
smart. Nope. Pete and Aaron. That's how it came about.
Aaron is somebody who's not currently with us, but in our presentation that we just listened to, we heard a little bit of him in the background. Are you saying that you and him started originally, and then Dustin came along and added a third-party service to the
right?
business here?
Yeah. Aaron and I have been long history working in Denver in the litigation support community. Litigation support can be this large, ambiguous umbrella. People who support attorney teams in depositions, process serving. It could be a whole host of different services. For us, it was focused primarily on the collection of data, processing of that data, and then taking all that data, putting it into a review database to help that legal team build their case. And so Aaron is steeped in digital forensics, and in my role, I'm the guy that is the guy that's not afraid to knock on an attorney's door and say, hey, this is who we are and this is what we do. And so we've built that practice over the last 5 years, and where Dustin has come along is we think in the world of data, electronic data, especially not just in litigation, but notice in the news every day, there's a breach, there's something going on, and there's a cyber angle to it. But there's also within those cyber events, there's workflows, systems, processes, even software that's tied into what we do with these attorney teams who are building cases for the litigation events. And so Dustin, we found, is about as good as it gets, who understands forensics, who understands cyber, and been recently, building this partnership to go after cyber events, specifically ransomware, email breaches, because some of the same expertise that we bring as a business lends to his expertise from a cyber awareness.
What is your category? So if you had to put yourselves from a category, are you investigators? Are you security? Are you just cyber generalist? Where do you categorize yourselves, or how do you think about yourselves?
I'll answer first. There was a time when we all know in our profession here in Colorado that the state of Colorado looked at the licensing of private investigators very differently than they do now. And there was a time that to collect evidence, you needed a license, private investigator's license. And that also meant collecting data off of devices. So Aaron was a private investigator. I came along and I didn't have the forensics chops that he had. But as a business, we decided that, I'm going to get my private investigator's license as well. And so for a couple of years, we fashioned ourselves as private investigators, if only because our traditional competitors who played in the forensics litigation support space didn't. And we thought, this is just something that could give us a point of conversation different with attorneys and paralegals who interact with people in the litigation support arena. And we said, there are some pretty sophisticated, skilled investigators, this local PPIAC chapter. We were not one of those. What we chose to focus on was simple tasks that allowed us to say to people, and we do forensics. And so after about 2 years, it worked. It got to the point where we had built enough of a following and that people could look at us as digital forensics first versus investigators, which seemed to coincide with the dissolution of the requirement in Colorado to have a private investigators to collect evidence. So since then, for the better part of, 2.5, 3 years now, I use the term litigation support. And again, it's this broad umbrella, but within it is for the attorney teams that we're working with, they're representing large commercial entities that are getting sued for millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, sometimes even much more than that. And so what can be at stake is the email that says what it's not supposed to say, depending on which side of the fence you're on. And it could be numerous custodians, numerous amounts of email, numerous enormous amounts of electronic documents. It could be social media. It could be emails out of Google and Outlook, this vast population of data. Well, we collect that for the legal teams. And you can imagine then what happens is you get this large, voluminous amount of data, but you might be only looking for truly the smoking gun that could be a 2-page email. So it's sifting, culling, filtering that data to whittle it down to what is the most relevant data set. And it's not crazy for us to collect a terabyte of data and whittle it down to 100 gigs of data, which is still a voluminous amount of data for a legal team to sort through, but it's not a terabyte. And so we'll put that into a database, some really sophisticated databases that allow the legal teams to sort, tag. Some of these legal teams might have half a dozen to dozens of attorneys looking through these databases, 100 gigabytes of data to find the relevant information that makes their case and ideally find that smoking gun.
So would you say you look at yourselves as data managers more than cyber technologists or cyber security? How do you call yourself, Dustin?
Well, I think, just to tag along with what Pete's saying here is there's this overlap, and what Aaron does and what I do are two different things, but they're also very similar at the same time. I just use a different lens. My focus is more where there is litigation scenarios where there may be a breach, a company's being sued because of this, or there's some sort of investigation that needs to happen because their insurance carrier is requiring it. And so we're just looking for basically kind of two different things. Mm-hmm. Mine are more involved in the cyber realm because what happens when a company is breached, there's often numerous systems, network compromises, endpoints that need to be analyzed. There's different techniques, right? The hackers are bringing in malware, different scripts that they're using to move around the network. Having that cybersecurity knowledge of how do you do these things from an attacker standpoint helps my investigations come through because I have to think like the attacker. What are we looking for? Where's the juicy data? What do I want to steal? Things like that. So those are the questions I start asking myself. And for every case, it's a little bit different. You have to learn the network. You have to learn where the juicy data is. You need to learn who the important users are and who's got elevated access. Aaron may be looking for an email, and I might be looking for a log file that shows somebody accessed an email. So it's very similar. There's a lot of overlap there. And that's why work really is just synergistic, right? It just comes together. There's so much overlap that tools that Aaron uses are very similar to tools that I'm going to use. And so those platforms are similar. It's just a little bit of a different flavor.
With so many different layers involved here, do you find when you reach out to potential clients that they're as knowledgeable about all the nuance and levels and layers? Or do you find yourself talking to people who think of it in very black and white terms and very broad concepts and maybe don't understand the difference of some of these terms you're using?
I think it depends on who your customer is. I think that's the first question. And then also, there's going to be different organizations in the company. A lot of times we work with the IT provider or the internal IT company to go and collect data. So there's another overlap, right? A cyber investigation, we're also going to collect data, tag it, analyze it, create chain of custody, right? So very similar patterns of behavior that Perin is already doing. And then it depends on who you're communicating with, right? Upper, CEOs, executives, things like that. You're going to have to bring it down a little bit. This technical talk is not really going to be something you're going to want to throw at them. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to translate what you're seeing. And that's really where our skills, I think, come into play is what does this technical thing mean and how is it important to you? And so when I bring my investigations in, what I do is I focus on a concept called risk. And this is really the speech that I kind of give everybody so that they can really understand it. So risk is the likelihood of something happening and the impact that it's going to have on you. And CEOs and executives, they want to know the impact. What does this mean to me? How important is it? What are the things that I need to consider that this is happening to me? Are there financial impacts? Do I need to notify my customers? Is my workforce distracted? And so you have to be able to speak this language as well. And so there's this very technical aspect to this job, but also a very personable aspect as well, too. There's a lot of communication with lawyers, too. And, Pete, maybe you can add on to this, but what I'm seeing is there are now lawyers that are specialists in cyber breaches. Oh, and so these individuals are a little bit more easy to communicate with. They're doing these things day in, day out. They may not have the technical experience or, the educational background that I do in cybersecurity or information technology, but they get the words. You can be a little bit more technical with them. They get it. And so I see the industry changing where there's more and more of this. So the conversations are actually becoming a little bit easier.
From a business standpoint, do you think it is more beneficial to have a contractor or employee that is technically savvy or human-to-human contact savvy. Which can you train? Can you train the human communication to work with clients, or can you train the technical part of what you're actually doing?
I'm going to give my opinion, and I think, not to embarrass him, and Dustin and Aaron might be as good as it gets in terms of translating the technical and talking to the different teams about what happened, because I do think there's a technical knowledge that has to be there. How it gets conveyed, someone could argue both, that ideally there's a hybrid in my mind, and we've worked with both. We've hired both in terms of one was good at the human communication, one was better at the technical, and vice versa. From our business, what we are trying to do is separate ourselves to reach the people who we can gain trust technically, but then help get to a solution through the human means, because there's an absolute cost, there's a fear, there's all sorts of implications. And how do you balance providing a solution technically with, okay, this is how this is going to unwind, and this is the process by which it's going to go about?
Is your business, your interest and your involvement based on the world we live in, that it's just everything is cyber and tech? Or is this something you grew up with, that even if the world were crystals and old spells, we would still be interested in this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer first, and I'll say that as a business, and this is where the involvement with Dustin in the cyber, you asked, are we data managers? What are we? Well, we are technologists. I'll just say that.
Okay. Sounds cool.
And and for at least Aaron and me at the moment, we look at technology through the lens of litigation events or information requests. Those might be in the form of FOIAs or CORAs, subpoenas, audits, right? Entities need information. They might need it from a pool of a big bucket of information, then they still need to whittle it down and then produce it. Well, what we see with cyber, specifically the ransomwares and the email breaches, is that some of the same workflows and processes and technology goes into solving those. Dustin can speak better than I can, make up this huge world of cyber, right? And we're trying to rifle and say, we're not going to be the company to go to for certain things related to cyber. But as it relates to the collection of data, the processing, the whittling it down to help cyber teams figure out what PII has been breached and who do we need to tell that it's been breached. Well, it's the same workflow in trying to find the smoking gun, as it relates to evidence.
So essentially, even though the world is all tech and cyber, you still have to pick a lane and
I think that we see we see the future though on Dustin's side of the fence as it relates to ransomware and business email compromise. Now, there will always be litigation. There will always be, those FOIA events, CORA events. Look at the headlines every day. There's a breach going on, and I think Dustin can tell you, if you're not breached now, you will be. Yeah. It's just a matter of when. And so we want to build a business practice around that, and we think that that's where we're headed.
So Dustin, did you see the writing on the wall as a young teenager and said, I'm going into tech and cyber? Or were you one of those kids who were tearing apart the radio as a young kid and trying to figure out how it worked?
Yeah, the second one. I mean, I was fascinated with computers when I was young. And I think I got lucky. I hit the sweet spot of when they were just starting to really be integrated into everybody's lives.
What year was that? You don't have to out your age.
1996, I got my first at-home computer. It was a 486 SX, 25 megahertz. I think I had a gigabyte hard drive. Oh yeah, real fast. Me and my friend would come over and we'd write Visual Basic programs, and we made this little program, where you played games and things like that. It was always something I was fascinated in, and it just stuck with me. And then when I got to school, I was studying information technology with a focus in security, and I had a digital forensics class, and I just couldn't get my mind off that class. And every time I came back to thinking about that, especially when I got later in my career, I didn't start in digital forensics, but I kept going, man, I really like that. I really like that. And I couldn't forget it.
What was the hook? What was hooking you?
It was the puzzle.
Okay.
It was the figure this out. And sometimes you go down this way and there's nothing there. And sometimes you go down this way and you get a little clue that takes you over here. And for me, I think my brain just eats it up. Like, how do I figure this out? And then the other cool thing is the validation of when you find something and you bring it to the company and they're just shocked. Like, well, how did you figure that out? And you're like, well, this is what I do. And there's a good feeling behind that. That's like, yeah, I can figure these things out. For me, it's the puzzle. But I wanted to go back to your other question about the technologist and the person. I've gone literally from staring at a hex editor looking at ones and zeros to sitting in a board meeting where the CISO is screaming at everybody because we have an incident and we don't know what's going on. There's a lot of high stress in this field as well. Quick turnaround times, demand for answers really quickly, not a lot of room for error, right? If you make a mistake and miss something, that could be really important. And so I think over time you learn how important it is to be able to communicate the technology that you're looking at and what it means. And that to me is the gold. When you find somebody that can do that, it's just you want to hold on to that person, really trust them.
Do you feel like you're under a specialist spotlight where because you are considered highly knowledgeable and a specialist, that you're always required to know the answer? You're always required to have the quick fix.
So good question. And I've even developed a speech to get over this. Because yes, you're right. That is the expectation, right? And Pete, I don't know if you've ever heard me say this before, but I tell people when I'm doing a forensic investigation, I say, imagine a puzzle of a dog. If you're putting this puzzle together and you lost half the pieces, but you were able to get most of it together, you'd probably go, oh, that's a dog, right? But it might be missing the ear and it might be missing the tail and the left leg is not in the puzzle, but you still know it's a dog. That's digital forensics. You're never going to get the full puzzle piece put together. You could look at a computer for weeks and months and still not look at every file. So there's this balance of how much time and effort do I put into this, into developing a clear enough picture. It's a building of circumstantial evidence to draw a conclusion. Very rarely do we find, like Pete said, that smoking gun of like, oh, we know who did this. I can literally like count on one hand how many times I've been able to attribute who did this. And that's just the nature of the game. Digital evidence is not made for digital investigators. It's made for functionality purposes. So we just kind of look at it and go, oh, well, based on this functionality, I can determine that this thing is happening. When Microsoft leaves behind a little artifact that's important to me, they didn't make it for me. They made it so the operating system can work efficiently. It just so happens it tells me something. And I think what happens is people think that, oh, well, you can just tell me everything that happened. And every time I type on the keyboard, that gets recorded. And every program I open, it's like, no, it's like, that's not actually how it works. There is this level that it gets to where we have to draw conclusions from.
Did the show iRobot? What was the show? Did that throw
Mr.
Robot? Did that throw everybody's reality perception off?
Any TV show you watch is going to be sprinkled with some Hollywood magic. So, but that one was pretty close actually. Yeah. There's some good stuff in that one. I did see a couple episodes, but for sure, half of the job is defeating this mentality that we're magicians, and we're just not.
The problem solving, is it specific to digital, or if you would have gone into engineering, you still would have that same fascination? Or is there something about the digital world that specifically hooks you?
I don't know how to answer that one. Yeah. That's a really good question.
Well, what did you do before?
I've been in technology since I was a kid, right? I almost knew right away, this is what I'm going to do. I didn't study anything else. I didn't go in it. I did some other like cyber security work that's not digital forensics, which at the moment was a little frustrating, but I'm really glad that I did it because it gave me a base knowledge of cyber that I bring into my investigations. And so that's a unique kind of situation in itself. I brag a little bit that I don't know a lot of people like me because I understand how to build a cybersecurity program. What are the best practices? Just the cybersecurity concerns that we need to follow. And I got to see what happens when you don't do that. Those are the things that if you miss, that you are calling somebody like myself or Aaron to say, oh, we had a breach. We didn't do our cyber right. Can you tell us what happened? So I get the whole picture. I don't know a lot of forensic investigators that can claim that.
Have you ever had a minimum wage job, McDonald's?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Starbucks. Yeah. Starbucks was my first job, yeah.
So was there a transition, or were those just filling the holes as you were building your career?
Yeah, I was young. I was a kid. Okay. So, and then when I was in college, I had a job at the computer store.
Okay.
And people would come in and, oh, I lost my paper, my hard drive crashed. And I had ways to, okay, I can get it. And man, I had people, oh, I'm so happy. Thank you so much. And so like it kind of started pretty early.
Okay.
Even before I became a official forensic analyst. So yeah, there were some old school techniques where we could get data back and help people. And so yeah, I was doing that stuff before it was actually my job.
And it sounds like for you, that seed was always there.
Something about it.
Pete, did you have a different career prior to this? Were you previously a baker or candlestick maker?
Mine's not as interesting. If things had turned out all right, I'd be the general manager for the Green Bay Packers.
I was born in Madison, Wisconsin.
Well, go Pack, go. I went to Ohio State to study sports management. And so I was on that path to get into sports field.
As an agent, sports management?
No, at that time, I wanted to be on the team side of things. And so it's funny how the world path you you go down. I got introduced to sales in a sports team setting, which was like what you might think of from a sales standpoint, but so much of it was problem solving, whether it was sponsor activities or season ticket activities. I don't think people would look at it like project management, but there was very much, you have a situation, how do you go from A to B? And certainly there's a salesmanship component to it, but it's very much solving problems.
Okay.
And I got into this industry by just knowing someone who was in it, and they said, I really like what you're doing. We think about working for us. I'm like, no. And then one thing led to another. And certainly, I think it was like 15, 16 years ago, got into this industry, and it's very much solving problems. There's a project management component to it. And so for me, I don't have the technical chops, but what I do have is looking at things with very limited resources, with an entrepreneurial mind, going, okay, how do we get an end result that's a desired outcome for this stakeholder, for that stakeholder, and this stakeholder? And then certainly over time figured out, okay, how do we do that to make an income off of it, make it a business idea? And so the stuff that we do as a company, kind of in the dark shadows of, okay, how do we get this going? Who do we talk about this? What's this idea? How do we formulate this? And the best cases result into, hey, Aaron, we have this case. What do we do with this? Hey, Dustin, we have this. What do we do with this? And that's my role.
That's how I want my tech guys to be, in the dark shadows of things. So you had more of a transition to this field, this industry.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it was more recent than later in life.
Yeah, no, when Dustin was playing with his first computer, I was full-fledged in my first job, and
you have minimum wage jobs also growing up.
Yeah. I'm that old. And so for me, it's, I love helping people. I love solving problems. And this is a field where there's an intensity of problems. They're never going away, especially with litigation, especially with cyber events. I think there's a host, a world of people. We've identified, maybe 6 months old, but 70 attorneys just in Denver who play in the cyberspace, privacy, data, security, that type of field.
Can I ask more of a business question? How did you go about finding or making that list of 70 attorneys? I want some insights to some marketing here.
Yeah, no, well, look, this is maybe what, I don't know if I can say I'm good at it, but it's like, okay, how many hundreds of firms in Denver? How many thousands of attorneys? We worked with a virtual assistant overseas. You could pay them like $5 an hour. I gave them a list of 50 top law firms in Denver, and I said, scrape all the websites and look for attorneys with these titles. 2 days later, we had a list of 67 attorneys, started coming up with a message and learned more about them to figure out, okay, what can we do to introduce ourselves and appeal to them?
And since we're on this little thread, I'm really curious. So where do you go from there? Do you start cold calling? Do you start mailing? Do you start showing up at the office and just smiling real big?
It's multi-pronged, because these attorneys are people who we think have decision-making authority and have experience in these type of events and work with companies so that they are the go-to for them. And so with that said, when we target them, I'm old enough where I'm comfortable getting on the phone and making a fool of myself over a cold call. And so that's the difference between Aaron and me. And Dustin, I think they are the sales engineers, but someone's got to knock on the door to get the sales engineer to them.
And you don't look to tech as being the solution to marketing. In this case, you look at it as still a human to human.
No, I don't want to ignore that. I think there's probably ways of doing it, but I'm appealing to my comfort level, and I don't have any qualms, calling someone and trying to get through to them and getting their attention just to start a conversation. But there are multiple other ways, and certainly, when we look at the landscape, attorneys, insurance companies, general counsel of corporations, and the IT people, different companies too.
It sounds like you're asking, and great answer, by the way, it is all about the people and it's all about the relationships. I think I also hear you saying, what's your technology answers? And, I can speak to that a little bit. I've run Google Ads, and this is kind of where I think Pete and I went, ooh, there's something going on here. And I read ads, and I was working with a marketing team to build out my website and get these, just different landing pages going. They interpreted my information in a form that actually played out better for private investigations. That really wasn't what I was going for, but they put this page up and I was like, okay, well, let's see what happens. And I tell you what, people were calling me left and right, and my budget was not even that big. If I really tried for that, and it just kind of consumed everything that I was actually trying to look for. And so Pete and I said, wow, there is a consumer grade issue here. And if you just take a step back and you think about how ubiquitous our phones are, our computers, there's internet accounts are just integrated into our lives at this point. People are struggling with this. And there's not a service for them. They don't know who to call. I had people calling me saying, "Are you the FBI?" And I'm like, "What? Where are you getting that from on my website? I don't know." But there is a need, and people are struggling with these challenges. And I've been able to help some of these customers kind of talk them down off the ledge. And what I've seen is that they like to draw their own conclusions. Google will give you the answers that you're looking for if you look far enough. They may not be right, but you can find it. And so my job often is to really kind of break down some of those myths that they're looking at, give them the real information, help them from a cyber standpoint. And they all have phones and they all have accounts, and these all have evidence on them and things that we can look at. And so I think, for Pete and I, we see that and just go, wow, nobody's helping these people. Let's help these people. There are some customers that we truthfully have to stay away from. Some people will wrap you in and try to keep you for the next 2-3 months, and there's no end in sight. Obviously, can't do that. That's not efficient.
The unpaid consultant.
Consultant, right? So, so we're still kind of working out the details of what this looks like, but the opportunity is clear. How it's going to play out is what we're working through. But I think we have some good foundations in how to do that.
In 2023, business, we just went through 2-3 years of watching businesses crumble in this idea of physical infrastructure. Does your business we are sitting in your office, but how much of the future and the reality is business requires physical walls and papers and people walking around closed areas? Is this a transitional stage also, or does your business require, we're always going to need a place because we have technology, we have devices, we have machines, we need a place?
I think the answer is, for the individual, I think there's a desire for hybrid. And I actually think that's what we need as well. There are some cases that I cannot leave the comfort of my living room and work on. There's some cases where somebody sends me a hard drive and I need to physically copy it. When it comes to digital evidence, you want to handle it properly, document it properly, secure it properly. You don't want that in, your personal apartment, right? So having an office is definitely a big piece of it. And it just depends on the case. Sometimes, like I said, we have phones. Sometimes there's a cloud account. So there's really just this mix that overlap, and it depends on the case.
And I would add, there have been cases of companies in our industry who we would maybe consider competitors or just peers, whatever, who have been target of breaches. And so it has been something that we're very cognizant of having an infrastructure in place to at least do what we can to reduce. And, I don't know if we could always say 100% eliminate, but, make it hard, just because, especially when you think about, at least on the litigation side, some of the data we're holding on to might be golden information to that law firm's client. That to a smart hacker, it's not the company that becomes just the target. It's not the law firm that just becomes the target, but it's the companies that support that legal team that become the target. That could be us. And so it is something that all three of us have aspects where we work from home, but it's making the infrastructure in place so that we can work from home, having that in place for us.
In the nature of your business, one bad events or incidents could pretty much PR-wise destroy your whole reputation. I guess there's maybe even more of an effort or focus for you guys to be on top of that than maybe some other business, like a Subway shop or something. So where does this business go in the future? I can imagine what it must feel like starting a business, because I've tried it a couple times myself. But being responsible for people and subcontractors, employees, and all of this, where do you see the future? How are you mitigating against all the potentials that could happen? And how are you just looking forward with the blinders so you don't scare yourself off?
Well, it's a great question. I'll answer it like this, that if you look at it from the eyes of a consumer, this world is just continuing to try to make things convenient and easy for us. And the technology, the devices, whatever goes about to make those things convenient are not always litigation friendly or cyber friendly. So I think there's always going to be a play for people like Dustin and Aaron and us as a business, because Apple doesn't build an iPhone to make it litigation friendly when there's events, yet everyone has a phone, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or whatever. As a business, we're pretty bullish that the events will continue to take place, that the demand for trustworthy, reputable, knowledgeable service providers to support in those events will continue. Now you've got AI through the chat app.
GPT or something like that.
Thank you. It's weeks old, and yet, competitors have already sprouted from Microsoft and, these others. And it's like the maturation process is not even playing out like normal. And so that's just going to add another layer of, what does that do to threats and to things that take place in this world? So I'm pretty bullish that the demand for people knowledgeable in forensics, people knowledgeable in different technologies to handle data is just going to be that much greater and, a place to play.
I think I can answer that from more of like a technological aspect, even in our field. And I wish Aaron was sitting here next to me, he'd probably be shaking his head. But, it used to be where I used to have to copy a hard drive every case I had. And now there are cases where I can log in on my computer, access somebody's email, and pull it down from the cloud. And so you've got this move to this cloud infrastructure. And then another interesting thing that's happening in the industry is the use of intelligence. And so information sharing, trying to get ahead of some of these attacks that are happening or finding what they call indicators of compromise. And so the way that this is evolving is it's trying to be more proactive and less reactive, but you're never going to get fully ahead, right? But you're just trying to get as close as possible to the event. And so from a technological standpoint, we're even seeing transitions in our own industry about how we collect, how we analyze, how we report. The types of cases that we're seeing are changing. Like, for instance, this consumer grade situations that we're running into. We're finding more and more of those high net worth individuals are having challenges. These are potential targets as well. Everybody's got their cloud accounts and things like that. So we're just seeing this shift from physical hard drives to more stuff that's on the internet and in the cloud.
Do you think the future, the way to mitigate risk in the future is, and it doesn't have to be one or the other, to focus on what you do and just become even more of the experts, more of on the front of everything, or to focus on the marketing so you get more clients, people know who you are, a combination of both, or some third thing?
Yeah, I would say the entire cybersecurity industry is changing. Some things are falling to the wayside. I don't see that happening with forensics. There are so many forensic investigation firms these days. They're all growing. They all have stock tickers now and things like that. And the industry shows no signs of slowing down. There's incentives for hackers. If they can make money, if they can steal things from you, and they can be in a foreign land and have no repercussions, they're going to do it. It's a good business model for somebody who's maybe in poverty or doesn't have a lot of opportunity. They can load up their computer and steal. There's just no end in sight. I'll say this in terms of the changes too. What we're seeing is a change towards insurance.
Insurance companies, or how people are insured? Cyber
liability insurance specifically. And even this industry is evolving. And so I made a prediction a couple years ago, actually, in a blog post that we were coming to a perfect storm because insurance companies were throwing out policies to people who had done nothing to protect themselves. It'd be like giving insurance to a car driver who's never taken a car driving test and doesn't have a driver's license and doesn't wear their seatbelt. Okay, here you go. Here's your insurance policy. And that's a recipe for disaster. And just in the last couple, year or two, we're seeing some of these insurance companies are hiking up premiums, denying payouts because of negligence, asking for information requests like, well, what are you doing about your cyber before we give you this insurance policy? And then when something goes wrong, these insurance companies are saying, okay, here's a list of providers that you can work with to make an investigation. And what happens is there are laws that are requiring these companies to do a digital investigation to find out, did we lose customer data? How much? What did it contain? Who are the impacted individuals? So when you get that email from T-Mobile that says, hey, we had a data breach, and then a week later you're getting text messages about your free T-Mobile gift cards, this is a reason why they have to do these investigations and things like that. That's kind of the internal shift we're seeing, but it's growth. It's not shrinking down. It's more and more and more.
So it sounds like all things insurance companies will lead the way and tell us what to do. I don't know if that's good or bad, but at least somebody will be counting the beans at the end of the day.
Someone's got to pay for it.
Right. Let me take a quick break so we can get a question asked. We're going to have the treasurer of the board, of the PPIAC board, Heather Reed, who's also sitting in on this conversation, ask a question.
So I'd like to know if your customer base at the moment, your client base, is coming to you pre or post horrific event.
It can happen in both directions, honestly. Just going back to what I just said here, the insurance companies are saying, yes, we will give you a cyber liability insurance policy, but you need to show us that you've executed these, exercises. You need to do a risk assessment, write a incident response plan, have policies and procedures, make sure you're hitting your compliance requirements. And so there is this aspect of what are you doing before? There's a whole market on that side. And then there's a whole market on, okay, you did everything you could and something still went wrong, which is certainly possible. And so you really have both. And it's probably about 50-50 if I had to take a guess, the preparation of protecting yourself and then as well as how do you recover when something does go wrong.
And then I'm curious to know what myth is the worst or most prevalent myth out there that you would love to see dispelled?
I'll speak to the consumer grade cybersecurity aspect. And these are the conversations I have at the very beginning to make sure that the expectations are set is they want to say, okay, I want you to tell me who it is, and then I want you to get them to stop. First of all, I'm not the police, right? I can't go arrest somebody. And the other thing is, like I said earlier, the way that digital evidence acts is it's just kind of there and we can look at it and figure it out. It's not made for us. So if somebody has put a remote access tracking application on your phone and they're monitoring your text messages, it's not going to leave behind their name, their phone number, and their email address so I can call them and say, hey, would you stop? In some cases, people get sloppy and we can make attribution, but I would say 95% of the time, there's no figuring out who's actually doing this. And so when you think about that word risk, right, what we're really trying to do is reduce the likelihood. What can we do to actually find ways to protect you instead of completely stopping it? And going to Pete's point, these devices we have make our lives easy. There's a price to pay. That price is risk. It will never go away. We will always have that price to pay. And that's my challenge right away from the beginning when a customer first calls me is to break that mentality down that I have some power to make this stop because I don't.
On the flip side of that, is there a myth that you wish people would believe more of because it's true and people are just discounting it because they think it's a myth?
I don't know if it's a myth. I would call it more of a unconscious kind of behavior with their digital devices. I have a friend here. I'll use this as an example. I have a friend that, one day I saw him typing in his passwords and I just said, hey, why don't you use a password manager? Oh, I don't know. It's just a lot of work. And then and there was all these reasons. And I said, well, this is really unsafe. So I got him signed up. I said, here, use this one, download the app, 6 months later, I'm over and there he is typing in his password. I said, hey, you don't have to do this. And you're making yourself a target through these poor password policies. And it's just a shift in this consciousness of like, okay, I'm going to learn how to use this app so that I can better protect myself. It's easier to just I don't want to do that. And especially like when you start seeing the older generation and it comes to technology, sometimes they're a little bit apt to want to stay away from it. I think people are just extremely careless. And, this is the world I live in, right? So to me, it seems easy. It seems simple to, oh, okay, this is how you do this. But what I see is it's actually really hard for the everyday person to go, okay, now I'm going to take my cybersecurity seriously. It's a mentality thing.
I would add that I think the seriousness of threats, if you look at hacking as just a business and you said, okay, I run a pizza shop and just within the 6-block radius, I have, 5,000 people from which to draw from. And a hacker truly has millions, hundreds of millions, and billions. I say that in the context of what do they have to lose when they can use automated technology to try to get a breach from someone? So that exposes every one of us. The threat is out there because it's not just one guy trying to do this, one woman trying to do this. It's all over.
The entire country of the Ukraine and Russia and
Right. Yeah.
everybody else down the line.
I can finish this off here is it's important to understand the types of attacks too. And you really have two types. You have a targeted attack, which is somebody that picks you and says, okay, I'm going to go after this person, try to get into their accounts. You also have something called a threat of opportunity. And to what Pete's saying here is that the hacker may blast out thousands of phishing emails and they're just hoping that one person clicks on it. And so it doesn't take any more effort to send one versus 1,000, right? It's something they automate. It's very simple. It's very easy. So you could accidentally be on these lists, not be using cybersecurity, best practices or just being unconscious about what you're clicking on. And next thing you know, a hacker's in your email. That's when it switches to a targeted attack. Now they say, oh, this person has a bank account. This person has crypto. This person has Social Security. I can get in there. That's kind of the play of what happens with these hackers.
The funnel is getting narrow and narrow and narrow as they go.
Well, and then they steal your contacts. who else is in this list that I can go
Branches
target?
out.
Right. And
Yeah.
I have trust of this email account. Let me see if I can get somebody else to click on something. So it's like this never ending web of attacks.
Well, I think a good way to wrap this up is what I think we've identified. Don't be lazy. Don't be apathetic. Don't be weak, and security will be just fine. Any last comments you'd like to say? Anything you'd like to promote? Any websites, social media, contacts, great phrases, quotes, poems?
You guys are looking at me. You know what? This has been a thrill. I appreciate you allowing us to do this, allowing us to present. I think it's an area that everybody needs a good dose of education and a reset every so often. We're at a good place to see this play out as a business and see the problems and the solutions. And so, think of us if something comes up.
Excellent. Dustin, final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say if you've appreciated anything I've said, I really take an education first approach to my cyber talks and things like that. So I have my own brand, which is TechX Cyber. So if you go to techxcyber.com, I've got white papers on ransomware, business email compromise. If you want to learn how to better protect your business, I have a YouTube channel. You can just do youtube.com/@techxcyber. I put about a video up a month. And these are just things that I run into in my day-to-day career that go, ooh, I need to talk about this. This is important. So if you want to learn, go check me out there. So tech, TECH, X, cyber, CYBER, all one word.
.com. Excellent. Thank you very much. Dustin Mooney, Pete Smith, and Aaron never came in, so we'll just talk crap about him for the next 20 minutes.
Call Dustin first.
And thank you, Heather Reed, for sitting in, our PPIAC treasurer. You guys had a really great presentation. I hope people have reached out to you or at least let you know that. And it's not always about getting business from the investigators themselves, but a lot of times the referrals and references that come. As we know, we run across people all the time with what we do that require the flip side of what we're doing, which is the cyber side. I'm sure we'll be in touch more in the future. Please come back to the meetings. I wish you the best of success in the future.
Very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the PPIAC podcast. I hope you were entertained and learned something. If you like the show, let our guests know on their social media and tell your friends and coworkers about us. I also want to invite you to our in-person monthly meetings, conferences, and development courses. The first Wednesday of each month at 6 p.m., we have our networking and training meetings. We even provide food. Learn more at www.ppiac.org or email me at training@ppiac.org. My name is Tarek Ocone, reminding you that an action is worth 1,000 ideas, and we'll see you at the next meeting.